On July 10, 1942, machinist mate Albert Knack, peering through the observation window of a PBY Catalina over Akutan Island, Alaska, spotted an impossible sight. A Japanese Zero fighter, inverted but largely intact, sitting in the wet grass. The Zero, with its unmistakable rising sun emblems, was the mystery weapon that had terrorized the Pacific skies for a year, shredding Allied air forces with contemptuous ease and outperforming land-based interceptors. The official American strategy for pilots encountering a Zero was simple and humiliating. Run away, avoid engagement, and do not attempt to dogfight. This was not cowardice, but brutal mathematics. American fighters that tried to turn with a Zero rarely survived. The American patrol plane, piloted by Lieutenant William Tease, had stumbled upon a prize that historians would later call almost beyond value to the United States. The story of Zero serial number 4593 began over a month earlier, on June 4, 1942, the same day as the Battle of Midway. As part of a diversionary strike on the Aleutian Islands, 19-year-old Flight Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga launched from the carrier Ryujo for a second strike against Dutch Harbor. During the attack on the American naval base, small arms fire from the ground struck Koga's aircraft, severing an oil line. Knowing his engine would soon fail, Koga turned toward Akutan Island, a pre-designated emergency landing field. He committed to a conventional landing on what appeared from the air to be a solid grassy flat. However, the field was actually marshland. The Zero's landing gear sank immediately into the soft mud, pitching the aircraft forward violently. It flipped end over end, coming to rest upside down. Koga died instantly in the inverted cockpit, his neck broken by the impact. Koga's wingmen, torn by conflicting orders, circled the wreckage. Japanese pilots had explicit instructions to destroy any Zero that crashed in enemy territory to prevent the enemy from learning its secrets. Yet, believing Koga might still be alive, they could not bring themselves to strafe their friend. They departed, low on fuel, hoping a waiting Japanese submarine would retrieve him. The submarine was driven away by an American destroyer, and Koga Zero sat undisturbed in the marsh for a month, concealed by fog and rain. On July 11th, Lieutenant Tease returned with a recovery team, approaching the overturned aircraft with caution. Chief Aviation pilot William Scarborough waded through the marsh, peered into the cockpit, and found Koga's body still strapped in. Koga was removed and given a Christian burial. Then, the team began the meticulous work of examining the Zero. And what they found was shocking. The aircraft was remarkably light. Scarborough noted the skin felt thin and fragile, and when he tapped the fuselage, it sounded hollow, like a tin can. He searched for armored plating behind the pilot's seat, armored glass in the windscreen, and self-sealing fuel tanks. He found none of them. This discovery fundamentally contradicted everything American aircraft designers believed about combat fighter construction. Modern fighters were being built with progressively more protection: armor, armored glass, and self-sealing fuel tanks, features that added weight but saved pilots' lives. The Zero had chosen performance over survival. A single bullet through its unprotected fuel tanks meant probable ignition, explosion, and catastrophic fire. The lack of armor meant a .50 caliber machine gun bullet would pass through the seat and the pilot with equal ease. After 3 recovery attempts thwarted by the notorious Aleutian weather, the Zero was finally dragged through the marsh and loaded onto a barge on July 15th. Even waterlogged and damaged, it weighed so little that 6 men could maneuver it. The Zero was transported to Naval Air Station North Island near San Diego, where it was placed under 24-hour military police guard to prevent souvenir hunters from dismantling the legendary fighter. Navy mechanics began the repair work, expecting crude copies built with inferior materials based on propaganda. Instead, they found a masterpiece of weight reduction engineering. The Zero used advanced lightweight aluminum alloys like extra super duraline, sophisticated metallurgy equal or ahead of American capabilities. Every component was obsessively designed to minimize mass, including permanently bonded wings, a short, light tail section, and fabric-covered control surfaces. Detailed measurements revealed the Zero weighed 5,555 pounds fully loaded, nearly 2,000 pounds lighter than the American F4 Wildcat at 7,426 pounds. This weight gap, despite the Wildcat having 250 more horsepower, gave the Zero a decisive power-to-weight ratio and lower wing loading, allowing it to turn tighter, climb faster, and maneuver more aggressively. On September 20, 1942, 2 months after the crash, Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, one of the Navy's most experienced test pilots, climbed into the repaired Zero for its first flight. The aircraft lifted off and climbed with an immediacy that startled him. At low speeds, its controls felt light and responsive, like a sports car. But as Sanders pushed the test envelope, he found critical limitations. Above 200 knots, 230 miles per hour, the ailerons, which controlled roll, stiffened, making rolling maneuvers slow and heavy. This asymmetry meant the Zero pilot would naturally prefer left rolls, information an American pilot could exploit. Most crucially, when Sanders put the Zero into a dive and pulled hard on the stick to generate negative acceleration, the engine coughed, sputtered, and quit. The float-type carburetor, which relied on gravity-fed fuel delivery, could not handle negative G-forces. This was the answer American pilots needed. The new tactic was simple. When pursued by a Zero, don't turn. Instead, push the stick forward hard, diving with negative G-force. The American aircraft, with its pressure-type carburetor, would continue running while the Zero's engine would quit. This single tactical revelation saved hundreds of lives. Sanders flew 24 test flights, revealing that while the Zero's maneuverability was extraordinary at low speeds, below 200 miles per hour, it became stiff and sluggish at high speeds, above 250 miles per hour, where American fighters gained the advantage. The data was compiled into technical reports and distributed to every fighter squadron in the Pacific. American pilots learned the new boom and zoom tactics. They were to gain an altitude advantage, dive at high speed for a single firing pass, and use their superior speed to zoom back to altitude. The order was clear: never get slow and never try to turn with a Zero. The captured Zero was flown against every American fighter type in mock dogfights, with each engagement filmed and analyzed. The biggest revelation was psychological. The Zero was not invincible. It had vulnerabilities. Marine pilot Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Walsh, a Medal of Honor recipient with 21 confirmed kills, later said the information derived from Koga's Zero saved his life several times. The influence extended beyond tactics. American aircraft designers studied the wreckage intensely. While the F-6 Hellcat's design was already advanced, the captured Zero provided hard data to validate design choices. The Hellcat, which entered service in January 1943, was faster, with a rate of climb that matched or exceeded the Zero, and crucially, it retained armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. It was designed to excel at high-speed combat, where the Zero struggled, its 2,000-horsepower engine enabling the boom and zoom tactics. The design philosophy that created the Zero, prioritizing offensive capability, maneuverability, and range by eliminating armor and self-sealing tanks, was based on the fatally flawed assumption that the war would be short and that pilot attrition would not matter. The war was not short. The Zero's lack of protection, initially an acceptable trade-off for performance, became catastrophic in a long war of attrition. A pilot in a protected American fighter could survive being shot down and return to combat, accumulating experience. A Zero pilot shot down once was likely dead, representing an experienced pilot lost forever. Japan could build aircraft faster than it could train replacement pilots, while America could train pilots faster than Japan could build replacement aircraft. The mathematics of attrition favored the side that protected its people. As the war progressed, later Zero models attempted to add armor and armored glass, but these additions increased weight by 28% without a corresponding power increase, making them slower, less maneuverable, and less effective than the original A6M Zero. By 1944, the Zero was obsolete. The lack of protection, initially an acceptable trade-off for performance, became the fatal flaw that destroyed Japanese air power. The capture of the Zero was a turning point, providing hope and revealing vulnerabilities at a time when American morale desperately needed a boost. When word of the intact Zero reached Japanese intelligence, there was consternation. They knew their primary fighter's secrets were compromised, and that American pilots would learn to defeat it. The Zero's capture accelerated the timeline of Japanese defeat by exposing vulnerabilities years earlier than combat attrition alone would have revealed. The ultimate lesson was not technical, but philosophical. The Zero embodied Japanese values of offensive capability and acceptance of risk. American fighters embodied values of pilot protection and long-term attrition warfare. In a long war of attrition, the philosophy that valued pilot survival prevailed over the philosophy that accepted pilot sacrifice. In February 1945, the Akutan Zero met an ignominious end when a Curtiss CB-2C Helldiver crashed into it during ground operations, damaging it beyond repair. It was scrapped shortly thereafter. But the intelligence it provided lived on. Tadayoshi Koga's unintentional sacrifice saved thousands of American lives and shortened the war by months, perhaps years. The abandoned Zero in the Alaskan marsh became the teacher that revealed not just how to defeat one aircraft type, but how to win the entire air war.